Lights shimmered across the rooftop when I watched my father tilt a white powder into my champagne glass, his hand steady, his smile unbothered. No one noticed. Not the orchestra, not the guests, not even my sister reaching for her drink beside me. I stood there, with the glass warming in my palm, pretending nothing cracked open inside me. They expected me to swallow it quietly like every other silence in this family. Instead, I lifted the flute, smiled back at him, and made a choice. Later, people would ask when everything truly began. I think it was the moment I didn't drink that night. I grew up in a house where silence carried more weight than praise. The walls were lined with Ava's framed certificates, polished trophies, glossy photos of her standing beside judges and coaches. My pictures were there too, but always lower, always smaller, always slightly crooked, as if the house itself understood hierarchy. When I was 12, I won the state science fair with a project I built on the kitchen floor while everyone else slept. I tested water samples from nearby creeks, charted the chemical runoff on poster board. The morning the results came in, I remember walking into the dining room holding the ribbon like it mattered. Victor didn't look up from his tablet. Helena scanned the newspaper. Ava was already dressed for her debate tournament, her hair pinned exactly the way our mother liked. "That's expected," Victor murmured, flipping a page. "A Harris should excel." Expected, not acknowledged. Helena finally glanced at the ribbon, not at me. "Your hair looks messy in the picture," she said, smoothing a wrinkle in the tablecloth. "Next time, stand straighter. Cameras pick up everything." That night, Ava's debate trophy took the center shelf. My ribbon ended up clipped behind a framed photo of her in a tennis uniform. It stayed there for years, half-hidden, collecting dust. The pattern never changed. Holidays were choreographed around Ava's accomplishments, GPA announcements, internship celebrations, the day she received her acceptance letter to a top business school. Every dinner conversation tilted toward her without effort, like water finding its level. My achievements were treated as logistical updates, scores that needed no applause because they were normal. When I applied to study environmental science, the house shifted. Victor called it a waste. Helena said no serious person would choose a field with no future. Ava hovered in the doorway while they lectured me, eyes soft but silent. I learned early that compassion without action still feels like abandonment. The summer before college, I interned with an environmental nonprofit instead of the family company. At breakfast, Victor read the email I'd sent declining their internship offer. He placed his spoon down carefully, the metal barely touching porcelain. "If you insist on embarrassing this family," he said, "you'll pay for your own mistakes." I nodded, went upstairs, and filled out a student loan application. The air in my room felt still almost grateful, like it understood something had finally been named. The night before I left for college, Helena folded my clothes with the precision she reserved for Ava's business trips. Not a word about the future, not a hug, not even a lingering look. Just a gentle tug on a loose thread on my sleeve, her mouth tightened in quiet disapproval. It wasn't cruelty. It was erasure so smooth, so consistent, it almost felt polite. Looking back, I can see it clearly. The empty seats at my events, the way conversations moved around me, the constant reminder that I was a shadow in a house built to spotlight someone else. That was the day I learned my place in this family. The hallway behind the rooftop kitchen was narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb. I only went there because the main restroom had a line stretching past the bar. The air smelled of citrus cleaner and overheated metal. I was halfway to the service door when I heard my parents' voices, low-clipped, urgent. "She can't have access to that trust," Helena whispered. "Not when everything is already unstable." "It activates next week," Victor replied. "If she's independent, she can talk. About the waste, the reports, the samples. You know what that means." There was a pause, then his voice dropped lower. "If she's hospitalized even briefly, the transfer stalls. And if something worse happens before the paperwork clears." Helena inhaled sharply. "Victor." "It's precision," he said. "A controlled setback. Nothing lethal unless she reacts badly. We need time." That's all. My fingers froze around the restroom handle. A quiet, steady burn spread across my chest, slow, almost methodical, like my body was trying to protect me from reacting too fast. They weren't talking about a punishment. They were talking about a contingency plan. About me. I stepped back before they could round the corner. The hallway felt colder on the way out, like the building itself had shifted away from me. Back on the rooftop, the party blurred into a wash of strings and laughter. Guests toasted to futures they didn't know anything about. Helena's smile was flawless again, her eyes scanning the room for imperfections to fix. Victor stood by the champagne table speaking with the head waiter in a voice that could have passed for pride. When the tray arrived, I watched him choose a single glass, the stem between his fingers, the slight tilt of his wrist, the faint, cloudy swirl sinking to the bottom like a secret settling into place. He placed it on the family my tray, and stepped back as if he'd simply completed a tradition. Ava appeared beside me, brushing stray hair from her face, laughing at some joke a cousin made. She didn't notice Victor watching me, didn't notice the way his gaze tightened when the waiter extended the tray toward us. I reached for the glass meant for me. My hand stopped. My heartbeat didn't. I turned, smiling the kind of smile that looked good in photos. "Here," I said, lightly holding it out to Ava. "Take mine. It's the nicer pour." She didn't question it. She never had reason to. She lifted the glass, clinked it gently against mine, and drank. I felt nothing, not shock, not triumph. Just a quiet, heavy certainty settling in my bones. A certainty that whatever came next had already begun. When Ava's knees buckled, the party didn't fall silent all at once. It rippled, first a gasp near the orchestra, then a clatter of silverware, then the dull thud of her glass rolling across stone. By the time I reached her, her skin had gone pale beneath the rooftop lights, her breath thin and irregular. Victor pushed through the forming circle, calling her name with a tightness he'd never once used for mine. Helena's hands shook as she tried to smooth Ava's hair, her voice trembling with disbelief. I knelt beside them, steady because I had to be. "We need an ambulance." No one argued. On the ride down in the service elevator, Ava's head rested against my shoulder, her pulse erratic under my fingers. I didn't let myself think about the poison, not yet. I watched the numbers blink above the door, listened to the hum of machinery, and kept my breathing slow. Her glass, my glass, the swap, the powder settling into gold liquid. The decisions you make in a single breath don't disappear just because the room changes. In the ambulance bay, paramedics took her from me, wheeling her inside under fluorescent lights that made everything look sharper, too sharp. Helena trailed after them, begging for answers. Victor stayed behind, gripping the railing as if the entire building had tilted. "You switched the glasses," he said without looking at me. I didn't answer. Silence was safer. Inside the emergency room, monitors beeped in uneven rhythm. Nurses moved with brisk efficiency. Dr. Shaw, calm but alert, examined Ava with a focus that left no room for panic. She collapsed. Suddenly, he asked, "Yes." "Any prior medical conditions?" Number symptoms escalated quickly. Confusion, tremors, and elevated heart rate that wouldn't stabilize. Dr. Shaw's eyes narrowed slightly, his professional instincts catching something beneath the surface. "This looks like exposure to an anticholinergic compound," he murmured half to himself. My throat tightened. "Check for modified derivatives," I said quietly. "Not commercial ones. Research grade." Dr. Shaw paused. "Why?" "Because the man standing a few feet away, fists clenched, had access to compounds no one outside the family labs should ever handle. Because I watched him tip a white powder into a glass with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it. But I didn't say that aloud. Just, check, I said instead. He nodded, already issuing orders. Detective Hall arrived 20 minutes later, notebook in hand. His questions were gentle, at first routine procedural. But when he asked what led to Ava's symptoms, I motioned for Nina and Jenna, both still pale from what they witnessed. Nina handed him her phone. The video played silently, Victor selecting the glass, placing it near the edge of the tray, the subtle drift of powder. Then, me smiling, switching the glasses, lifting a safer flute to my lips while Ava drank. Detective Hall rewound the clip, watched it twice more. Expression tightening. "I'll need copies of all recordings," he said. "They're already in your inbox," Jenna replied. I hadn't asked them to do that, they just knew. As they stepped away with the detective, I sank into one of the waiting room chairs. The vinyl was cold against my palms. The air smelled like sanitizer and recycled air. A vending machine hummed softly near the wall. These small sounds grounded me more than anything else could. They were neutral, predictable, safe. Victor and Helena sat across from me. He kept his eyes on the floor. She kept hers on the entrance to Ava's room. "You've misunderstood something," Helena whispered eventually, voice thin. I didn't respond. "We would never harm our own family." She added louder this time, as if volume made it true. Still, I stayed silent. It was Dr. Carter who approached next, his face drawn with concern. He'd been at the party earlier, congratulating me with a softness I wasn't used to receiving. Now he looked at me as if piecing together something he wished he hadn't guessed. "I heard what happened," he said. "If there's anything you know, anything that could help." "There is," I replied. "But I've already given it to people who can do something with it." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. Hours bled together. Tests were run. Samples processed. More detectives came. Agent Brooks from the Federal Environmental Division arrived with a quiet gravity that shifted the air around him. He reviewed the video. He asked about internal documents' access history. I answered what I could without embellishment, without emotion. Facts were enough. By the time dawn crept through the far windows, Ava was stabilized, groggy, confused, alive. I stood by her bedside, watching her eyelids flutter open. "It wasn't supposed to be you," I said softly. Her brows knit weakly. What I didn't explain. She was still fighting the last effects of the compound. Truth could wait for clarity. Back in the waiting room, the city was beginning to stir, traffic humming somewhere far below, morning shifts clocking in. I pulled my bag into my lap and began the work I'd been putting off for years. I opened my laptop, typed a list of dates, cross-referenced every strange shipment, every withheld update, every internal memo Margaret had warned me about in her journal, scanned the photocopies of water tests she'd kept at the lake house, filed the photos I had taken of the West facility's drainage site, collected screenshots of emails, threats masked as guidance offers disguised as commands, organized everything into labeled folders: research environment, trust, corporate missteps, family directives. Nothing dramatic, just truth waiting in neat stacks. I drafted a message to Claire, the attorney I'd quietly contacted weeks earlier when the house had grown too quiet before graduation. "We need to move forward now." I sent it without hesitation. One by one, I closed the tabs tied to my family name, opened new ones tied to my future, scheduled a meeting with the federal investigators, downloaded copies of everything to an encrypted drive, deleted old access links to the family servers. I worked through the sunrise, the waiting room empty except for a cleaning crew pushing carts down the hallway. When I finally stood stretching my stiff shoulders, the weight I'd carried for years felt lighter, not gone, just no longer strapped to me by force. I looked once toward the corridor where my parents sat speaking in hushed voices to their lawyer. Their silhouettes were small from this distance, contained, manageable. For the first time, they weren't the center of the frame. I stepped outside the early morning air, cool on my face, and whispered into the quiet, "This time I won't fix what they've broken." By midday, the hospital had shifted from quiet urgency to controlled investigation. Uniformed officers guarded the hallway outside Ava's room. A pair of detectives spoke in low tones near the nurse's station, and beside them, Agent Brooks reviewed the printed toxicology results with a focus sharp enough to cut through steel. Dr. Shaw approached me first. His expression was steady, but I could see the tension in the way he held the chart thumb pressed against the corner. "The results are back," he said. "Your sister was exposed to a modified anticholinergic compound, research grade, not available commercially." The room didn't spin. It didn't even tilt. It simply narrowed until all I could hear was the soft hum of the overhead lights. "We've seen preliminary data on similar compounds," Agent Brooks said, stepping beside him, "from labs tied to your family's company." Victor and Helena, seated a few feet away, stiffened. Detective Hall tapped his pen against the tablet. "We'll need statements. All of you." They took Victor first. I watched him square his shoulders, slipping into the authority he'd worn his entire life. "This is absurd," he began. Ava must have had a reaction to the food or alcohol. Our family has no history of Detective Hall turned the tablet around. The video of the toast played silently, Victor selecting the glass, the powder settling, the stem in his hand, my smile as I switched the flutes, Ava drinking. It was the cleanest piece of evidence I had ever seen, quiet, irrefutable, methodical. Victor's face drained of color, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. A man accustomed to controlling narratives now stood in front of one he couldn't bend. She drank what was meant for me, I said. No accusation, no emotion, just a fact placed gently onto the table. Helena rose from her chair as if pulled upward by wires. "You don't understand," she whispered. "We were protecting the family. Everything was falling apart. The investigation, the reports. If those documents went public so you tried to slow me down," I asked. Her silence was confirmation enough. Agent Brooks spoke next, flipping through a stack of lab access logs. "Mr. Harris signed out the compound 3 days before the graduation party. And we've located a storage unit tied to falsified signatures. Documents, research samples, disposal records, all indicating attempts to shift liability." Victor shot Helena a look sharp enough to break glass. "You should have kept your mouth shut." She flinched. Detective Hall closed his notebook. "Both of you will be taken into custody, pending formal charges." 2 officers stepped forward. Metal clasps clicked shut. Ava, still weak, watched from her room doorway, leaning on the frame eyes, swollen but clear. When our parents were led past her, she didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at the people who raised us as if seeing strangers for the first time. Victor turned toward me. "You did this." "No," I said quietly. "You did." Helena reached for Ava with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, please." Ava stepped back. She didn't need to say anything. The distance was its own verdict. As the officers guided them away, the hallway felt suddenly wider, the air less constricted. No victory, no triumph. Just space, clean, empty space where their shadows used to be. Agent Brooks handed me a card. "We'll need your cooperation moving forward. You'll have it." He nodded once. "Justice begins with clarity. You've given us that." When they were gone, I sank into one of the chairs outside Ava's room. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, leaving thin bars of light across the floor, like the world had quietly shifted into a different shape while we weren't looking. Ava sat beside me a moment later, her hand finding mine with a steadiness she didn't yet have in her legs. "Is it over?" she whispered. "No," I said. "But it's beginning." The lake house was quieter than I remembered. Quieter than anywhere had a right to be. Mornings came in pale layers, mist first, then the thin blue of early light, then the slow reveal of the shoreline, as if the world preferred to wake in increments. I'd wrap my hands around a warm mug, sit on the wooden steps, and let the cold air settle against my skin. After months of sirens, courtrooms, and fluorescent hospital lights, the silence felt almost impossible. Ava moved carefully around the house those first weeks, still recovering, still building back the strength that the compound had stolen. Sometimes I'd hear her pacing softly upstairs, the creak of old floorboards aligning with her breaths. Sometimes she'd join me outside, wrapped in one of my sweaters, staring at the water without speaking. She had traded her crisp business blouses for simple cotton shirts. Her hair, always perfectly smooth under Helena's watch, now fell in loose waves. She looked like someone stepping out of a costume she didn't know she'd been wearing. Meanwhile, my days took on a new rhythm. I worked remotely with a small environmental restoration group, drafting impact assessments, analyzing chemical footprints, developing plans for cleanup sites, much like the facility my family once operated. There was a quiet satisfaction in using the knowledge I'd gained knowledge they wanted to suppress for something that restored rather than concealed. Every now and then, federal updates came in. Notices about seized accounts, progress reports about soil remediation, transcripts from former employees who finally felt safe enough to speak. I read each one slowly without celebration, as if digesting a language I'd spent my whole life hearing through closed doors. Closure wasn't loud, it was administrative procedural steady. One evening I walked the narrow path behind the house. Leaves cracked under my shoes, the lake catching the last red sliver of daylight. I stopped at the dock, breathing in the scent of cold water and pine. My reflection on the surface looked calmer than I expected, older somehow, but lighter. The rooftop party felt far away, like a film I'd once studied rather than lived through. The glass, the powder, the choice I could still see each moment sharply, but the urgency had faded. In its place was something else. Not forgiveness, not victory, just release. Later inside, I found Ava at the kitchen table sorting through her law school materials. She looked up, offered a tired but real smile. It was the first time in months I saw her eyes without fear behind them. "There's still a lot ahead," she said. "I know. But it feels different now." It does. A breeze moved through the open window, lifting the edge of one of her notebooks. She held it down with her palm, steadying the page. For a long time, we just sat there listening to the quiet, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you, doesn't hide anything from you, the kind that finally felt like ours. I used to think survival meant staying small, staying quiet, folding myself into whatever shape kept the peace. Now, standing on the dock with the lake breathing against the shore, I understand something simpler. Distance isn't abandonment, it's recovery. Truth doesn't need an audience to matter. It just needs space to stand. My family taught me how silence can wound. Life taught me how silence can heal. And somewhere between those two edges, I found a boundary that finally holds. The life ahead of me isn't loud or triumphant. It's mine. And that, at last, is enough.